An unleashed leader is one that builds other leaders. When I see someone on my team run to start up their own company or move up in the organization or hit their personal goals, that's really what we're there to do as leaders. I think unleashing the ability for other people to succeed. I have a personal coach as well, and that's one of my personal mantras of what I like coming to work every day for. But man, when other people succeed and you're a part of helping make that happen, support that in any way whatsoever, that's what I think it looks like.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing podcast, where we are committed to accelerating the changes you seek. Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by Rob Catalano. He is the Chief Engagement Officer for WorkTango. He is currently operating out of Toronto, Canada, but his organization is affiliated with folks all across North America and I think the globe, if that's correct, Rob. You guys doing international work now as well, too, which is pretty awesome. And today, Rob is going to be able to share his very deep discovery, expertise, and his continued experimentation with what can leaders do to build the right environment for their employees to thrive. And so, we know there's a lot of things that go into that. He's going to share a couple of very practical tips that can help us make that happen with some things that we might take for granted, but if we don't do it well, we have missed opportunities to really unleash the power of our organization. So, Rob, it is really good to have you on the show. I know I've been looking forward to this for a couple of months. We've been super busy, but great to finally record with you.
Yes, Lee, likewise. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And we're all waving the same flag, right? We care about this stuff. So it's great to be on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Definitely. Well, let's back up our truck a little bit here. Tell us about little Rob. Like way back in the day, you were at band camp and you had this discovery. No, I'm just kidding. But what first turned you on that, hey, there was something to be had and the way leaders show up? I mean, was it a bad leader? Was it, you just going to the ivory tower and magically inventing all of this? Like, what was a pivotal moment early in your career? How did you get started in this work?
Yeah, it's actually funny when you reflect back on some of the decisions you make and then how it changes the course of what you do and who you meet. It's pretty crazy. But if I look back to little Rob in high school, I was looking at being a journalist and I said, I'm going to, go to university with a journalism degree. And when I started down that process, I thought to myself, you know what, I don't know, that's a little risky. I don't know what the job is going to be. So I said, I'm going to switch and get into business school and get into marketing. And, still a component of being creative there. And I spent, a couple of years starting that business degree. And midway throughout that journey, I got a job with a marketing agency. It's gold, right? That's what you're trying to get into. That's where your career is going to be. And it was great, right? For the 2 years of university that ended with, I had a job full time in the summer, working during the time, working with other brands and organizations. And then when I graduated, I had a job. It was fantastic.
You arrived. That's the dream. That's everybody's like, go to school, get a good job, in your degree field. This is the perfect playbook, right? So, great talking with you. We're going to hang up right now, right?
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I literally have a t-shirt that says living the dream. I say it all the time. And that's what I thought, little Rob, a year out of university thought. And what was interesting is now that I was full time and kind of a year or in my second year, I would, I built enough rapport there, was managing clients. I'd sit in client offices all across Canada and the US, right? I would go once a week and sit in, a large brand that you would know. And the next day I would sit in the office of another large brand. And what started happening is quickly, I just started thinking to myself as I looked around these offices, I was like, man, people are miserable at work. This is what I'm going to do. If I look at it, I just started my career, that's what I have the next 40 or 50 years to look forward to. It's just not want to be here. And quickly right there, I said, this is not for me. And I shifted gears, which I could talk a little more if you'd like to, but that was a revelation that said, listen, we spend most of our waking time at work. If we're not loving it or doing something with purpose, I'm not interested. And, despite my parents who didn't understand, why I quit and didn't have a job. And but I'm Italian, so I was living at home. That's okay. And I just decided that there was something else out there that was a little more purposeful than what I went to school and studied.
Yeah, Rob, I want everybody out there who either is really young and hasn't even got into that point. They're like, well, I got to decide what my major is, because that's going to determine the rest of my future. And then that first job, and then I'm going to climb the ladder, and then I'm going to retire, and then I'm going to die. And you're like, and there's so much stress on there. And in your case, you had it play out exactly the way you wanted. And then you still got to the end of that point and realized that wasn't what you really wanted. So I think, first of all, like, give yourself a little grace, right? Like, you don't have to have a total plan mapped out for your entire life. And then second of all, even if you did, if you get there and you realize it's not the hill you wanted to be on, it is totally okay to make a change. And in fact, almost all of us have. And if you haven't yet, almost all of us will. And you did it. And it was scary, and it sounded completely irrational. And yet it was the most logical, loving thing you could have done for yourself. So I just that fact alone, I think should relieve a lot of mental health pressure that's on a lot of young people these days. So thank you for sharing that. So yeah, what did you rediscover, and what new paths showed up before you that you had never even thought of before?
Well, it's funny because you talk about like making the shift or a new path, but when I really thought about what I wanted to do, I started getting away from this role, this type of company, this title, and what I was really passionate about in the marketing lens, like what I studied and went to school, and it was two big things. One was, like, I love the concept of metrics and data, right? And at that time, I graduated over 20 years ago. But at that time, all the metrics and the data was on marketing's plate. You're spending all this money. What's the ROI? And as I reflected in organizations, like, the biggest budget line wasn't marketing. It was people. Do we have data on people? And so it was a bit of a shift in passion and interest that wasn't maybe marketing, but it was, well, how do we dig deeper into organizations? And the second is, like, think about any marketer, right? Like, you think about consumer behavior. Why do people tie themselves to your brand? Why do they care about wearing your logo on their shirt? And quite honest, I said, well, who cares about consumer behavior? All the employee behavior. Like, why are these people miserable at work? Why do they not want to be here? I almost swore there, and I don't know what the rules are.
Consumer, even for some of these really big brands, I remember doing some work with Mattel back in the day, and they were like, our customers work with our products, on average 18 minutes a day, and that's like, it is a pivotal, and it's true. It was like, and they were all about those 18 minutes of play, and what did that look like? And then you're like, man, our employees spend 8 to 10 hours a day. Like, oh my God, it's a totally different magnitude we're talking about here.
Yeah. And all the interest and thoughts around the behavior of people, as they consume, to your point, you spend most of your time at work. Like, why do people tie themselves to a company? Why do they give more discretionary effort? Why are those people loving life? The other people in the lunchroom are, complaining about work the whole time. So that's, to me, it wasn't really this major shift in what I found interesting, but it was just a totally different world of, what I went to school to do, to be a brand manager somewhere.
It was just a different application. It was still the same aptitudes, but it was a different application, right? Rather than looking at the consumer or the customer or the buyer, looking at the people who are making that happen, because that's an experience too that could be measured, and that can have an impact. So what a great insight. You connected two things together. And 20 years ago, this was all radically new, brother. I was right there with you. I'm like, oh, what? Everybody else thought we were crazy. And now it's like, oh my gosh, this is where our biggest budget items are, and the greatest opportunity for a return on investment. So tell us a little bit more. Than now, fast forward. I know you went through a lot of gyrations to get here. But tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now. And then I wanted you to share some of those tips about how we can use data, use insights to be able to drive that connection to the employee experience.
Sounds good. Yeah, maybe I'll start with the journey, because I think it's really relevant. But I when I wanted to get into that new world, I didn't know what that new world was, and was lucky enough to land on, being a part of the founding team at a company called Achievers that provided recognition and reward software. And what I thought was going to be, a quick job to found the next career. It ended up being 11 years of growing that company, but more importantly, see the impact and influence on how creating a great work experience and not only grow our companies, but supported our customers' growth. And after doing that 11-year journey in 3 different countries, I actually went on my own and founded WorkTango with the same concept of understanding employee sentiment, right? That's the data part. And then recently, 2 years ago, merged that company with another recognition and reward company just because I seen the value and I love it. You're probably looking at my shirt right now and it talks about Employee Appreciation Day should be every day. But that's what I'm doing now. I'm on the leadership team of WorkTango, which is a platform that helps companies listen to their employees, build better experiences. At the end of the day, right, they're the inputs that drive all the outputs you care about, like customer sat and your profitability. So 20 plus years, super passionate about it. And, it's been a fun journey and I don't think it's ending anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, isn't it funny? The thing you spent, high school through college that you thought would be your lifetime career ended up being a year or two. And the thing you thought was going to be a temporary stint has now become a lifetime with multiple companies merging and continuing to evolve. So again, that inversion of the career trajectory, that's the subtext of what's going on here. I love this. I love this. Well, and you're bringing up this notion. I remember reading the book, The Patient Comes Second, right? Which was in a hospital context, right? That, if, as much as we want the patients, they're our customer in the hospital network, we really want to make that the priority. If the employees are miserable, like to you, what you just said, if they're not providing the experience, if they're not providing the outputs and the activities for that, it's never going to happen. So the lever that you have for best achieving that, again, is through your employees and the way how you're exercising the levers through that employee sentiment. So could you tell us a little bit, what does that phrase even mean? Employee sentiment. It sounds kind of squishy. How in the world could a dude get data on that? And then even if we haven't yet bought your organization's tools and techniques, what are some things we could do even if we don't have all those cool tools, which you should definitely check out at WorkTango. But what is employee sentiment, Rob?
Yeah, so it's effectively understanding how employees feel about their experience at work, right? If you truly believe that employees will be the ones that build great experiences for customers or great service or build great products, again, they're the inputs, as mentioned, to all the outputs you care about. If you don't understand what's working and what isn't in their scenario, you're going to lose people. We know the cost of attrition. We know the cost of, the connections people build at work, right? Whether it's with internally or with your customers. Like it's expensive to lose people and rehire. So how do you understand how they're feeling, what's working, so you can react and build that better experience? And again, I probably don't have to convince all the people on this call that all the data exists there on how higher engaged employees drive results, innovation, you name it. But when I talk about that and people say, well, what does that really mean? Like understand how they're feeling or what they're thinking. Get back to any technology company out there, right? When they build products and put it in the market, we've moved away from this waterfall idea where you build technology for 2 years, you throw it to the world and you say, hey, do you like it? And quite often they don't because you haven't received feedback from the customer, whether they've liked the experience or not. And that's where this concept of agile came out, where, you launch a product, you get feedback. If it's failed, it's great. It failed at the beginning and you're on to the next thing, but at least you're getting feedback to reiterate in terms of what's working and what isn't. Like ChatGPT threw something out in the world. Now we're on 4.0, right? So when you talk about sentiment, what's working and not working in the employee experiences, because if we can make that a great experience, we know that translates to personal and business success.
Absolutely. Yeah. That rapid closing those feedback cycles, doing more rapid iterations of it, 100%. And, that principle, whether you're doing process improvement, tech development, product development, it's the same principle of, get stronger, faster, shorter feedback loops. That is the pathway to progress, not like plan, whiteboard in a black, dark room, and then spring it on perfectly formulated. Ta-da! Everybody love me, right? It's like, dude, sorry. It's just the world don't work that way. It's too complicated and it's changing too fast. Love that parallel. Well, as you've had a chance to do this work across so many different organizations and brands and other industries, what are some recurring themes that kind of keep popping up for you, Rob, where you're like, look, okay, yes, if you could leverage some technology to be able to capture, measure that employee sentiment, wonderful. But even without that, what are some of those recurring themes that leaders could be mindful of? And I know you've got a couple of them that have been showing up pretty loudly in your world.
Yeah, I won't tie it to the, the sentiment side, but I get the pleasure of seeing all that data to see what correlates with moving the needle and what works and what doesn't, and what leads itself to success. So I think I'll use a bit of data, but also, just the experience of what I've seen work in organizations. And, I might be repeating myself here, but in the concept of recognition, the reality is it's typically one of the largest drivers of providing a great experience. People have intrinsic motivation that when they get recognized, they repeat those type of things. It's human beings. I mean, we respond really, really well to it. And when people know that they're doing a great job, again, it translates to just a better experience, knowing they're valued. And as humans, we want to be valued. So, I always talk about if there's a way to build, and if your company can't invest in the effort and the technology and the structure, like do it with your team. Like at the end of each meeting, just have a recognition moment and tie it to something important, like your corporate values or your competencies or something. And that typically I've seen companies change their cultures over the last 20 years just by like thinking about and being intentional about recognition of their employees. Now, I'm happy to dive in there, Lee, but like recognition is positive feedback. The other part is other feedback, right? How do we get better and qualify for next jobs? But let me know if you want to pause there for a sec.
Well, I think those are the engines. Those are two patterns. It's like how we deliver what I would call reinforcing feedback. Recognition, positive acknowledgement, and then how do we deliver redirecting feedback, which is more of the constructive feedback, corrective, whatever. That you're talking about feedback loops between the employee sentiment and the company as a leader will be good on your feedback loops between you and your team, even if you don't have the really fancy tools. And I think, I think our listeners would love a little bit of a deep dive on each of those, because you're right. I think the folks that have made it this far in our show, they absolutely value these things. And yet it seems like it's hard to do for some leaders, right? They're just like, what does that look like? And I'll give you one example that I run into, Rob, with a lot of our clients, where they're like, well, I want to recognize them, but it's not perfect yet. That kind of a thing. Or, I don't have time to recognize them, or I feel like I'm recognizing them and they're not hearing it. So I don't know what to do. Right. Or I never got recognition, so I don't see why they need recognition. Like those are all examples of blocks or leashes that are keeping leaders back from being able to really know how and when to deliver effective feedback. So if you could shed a little light on those things, what's your approach? How can we do it? You don't have to make it so, big and fancy and ticker tape parade, because I think that scares some leaders from doing it.
Yeah, I'll bucket them together in a couple of just pillars that I've seen organizations focus on and provide success. One is a bit of what you said and I said, is you have to make space for it. So when it comes to recognition, whether that's in your calendar, at a team meeting, like I know it sounds awkward when you launch that and have a recognition, agenda item, but eventually people start understanding it. It's part of your culture. That's how you build a culture of recognition. But same thing with feedback. Right? Like as a business leader or CEO or whatever my role has been over the years, I've always created space to say, and you have to be vulnerable to do it, to say, well, what sucked? Like what didn't work this last month or quarter? And anyone that loves, Jim Collins and Good to Great, the brutal facts concept, like ask people what sucked, but then talk about what do they think is the most important to fix? How do they be part of the solution? Because they have, they're the ones giving feedback on what's not working. They probably have answers on how to fix it. So I think making space is just one part of it. The second is there is a right and wrong way to give recognition or give feedback. I use this model all the time on the recognition side where saying thank you, yeah, kind of impactful. But if I say thank you, that's what I call SMT, specific, meaningful, and timely. For example, thank you for going out of your way to do this for a customer. It's meaningful because one of our corporate values is about building great customer experiences, and you're living that every day. And timely, guess what? I'm telling you this today, not 364 days later at the company all hands when we do the rewards, annual reward.
Yeah. Here's your plaque. 10 years ago, you showed up for work on time,
Yeah. And the same with feedback, right? Like think about the retrospective in technology world or anywhere. Like what didn't work? What did? And we do more of that. But more importantly, what are we going to do differently next time? So I think structure really supports the conversations around recognition or feedback, and it makes them more impactful. And then the last part, I think, is a pillar of success is measurement, right? If this is important to build your organization, how do people feel about their recognition in the organization? How do people feel about their leaders giving feedback on a regular basis, not an appraisal of 1 to 3 at the end of the year for the performance management purposes, checkbox that you got to do. So those are just some key components of how it's not rocket science to your point, but it's being really intentional about the approach, making space, and then seeing if it's working or not.
Fantastic. Well, you said it really fast, but it was a really good nugget. I just want to pull it back up. Said when you're giving recognition, part of the structure is to make it specific, to find the meaning of it and deliver it timely. So that was the SMT that you kind of zipped by there. But I think that's a really okay, I'm a leader. I'm in a moment. I just saw something that was kind of great. And, I never got praise growing up. And so this feels awkward and weird to me. So I want to, but I know I need to do it. So, okay, what was specific, tie it back to, why is that meaningful? Who is it meaningful to? Is it meaningful to our core values or competencies or whatever? Right. And then do it in a time. And it's better. I would say it's better to microdose frequently than it is to mega dose infrequently. I think that was kind of the point you were making, where it's if I do a little drip of this periodically, every other week or so, with just a moment in a conversation, versus I save them all up and then it's a really big, raise or a promotion or a plaque or an award ceremony. Those two don't compare. So that notion of timely microdosing it, were the elements I heard there. I just wanted to anchor it. It's so easy and fast for you. All those other folks are what did he just say?
Yeah, maybe a good way to think about it, similar concept to think about it differently, is how do you turn, the once in a while milestone recognitions in your company to always on recognition to build that culture. And what I mean by that, you just said it, Lee, right? Here's your 10-year award. Everyone gets recognized the same because they were breathing for that long and they lasted. It's not, yes, you should recognize it, but so many companies have budget towards these awards that it doesn't matter how long. You can't give me anything after 10 years, and no company typically does, to say thank you for all the work and effort and blood and sweat and tears and time. But I've seen a lot of companies shift that approach and say, we have this budget. How do we instill that always on culture of recognition, whether that is through technology or supporting smaller recognition or reward moments? And that's when you start seeing more impact, right? It's just like a relationship, right? You can't say I love you at the altar and then I love you 5 years later, right? There's relationship building and things that are important.
Now look, but that's so much more efficient if you do that, Rob. I mean,
I hear you.
If that ever changes, I'll tell you, honey, right? We're good, right? And that should get us the next 20 years. Dude, we in the doghouse so fast.
Oh man. The amount of money companies spend on literally recognizing people because they were there a long time, it's phenomenal. And especially in today's economic environment, I've seen companies make a hard decision to say, maybe we'll spend a little less there. We will overexert on the recognition side, which is free. It doesn't cost a lot to recognize people and have their employees tell stories of the impact those people made in their 5 and 10 years. There's ways to do that. But if you really want to build a culture of day in and day out recognition, which again, all the data shows that impacts great experiences, it touches on people's intrinsic motivators, as I said, that's where companies are seeing rubber hit the road and impact from that investment.
I've got a client of mine. She's an amazing leader. Love to have her on the show. She's just super, super crazy busy. But I won't say her name right now because I don't want to embarrass her. But she noticed the other day is whenever somebody gets a promotion or somebody's being recognized, the template of that, the tendency is to have oh, they've been here for 10 years. Oh, they've been here for 4 years. Oh, they've been here for so long. And and to your point, that's just well, that just meant they were breathing that long, right? And that's loyalty and tenure that is to be valued, no knock on it. But could we not highlight instead, what was the contributions that they made? What were the competencies that they demonstrated, right? What was the character that they exude every single day? So it's hey, congratulations on Rob on his new appointment. He's now going to be the chief engagement officer. And really, he stepped into this role because of his contributions in area X, Y, Z, and his demonstration of, a competency, A, B, C. And he really exudes these characters, So you're yes, he happens to have been here for 8 years. Right. Got it. But that's not why. And so then, because it sends a perverse signal that comes well, then you just got to do your time. and eventually your day will come and then you too will get promoted. And it's like, no, that's not the criteria. And so we end up creating this mixed signal by emphasizing longevity versus contribution. So it's just a pattern to your point that I think companies are starting to wake up to.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate, right? It's not that they're not important, like doing an employee of the year or a years of service award, but in isolation, they are not going to drive. Like those people are getting recognized the same as everyone else, whether they're a top contributor or not, just because they stayed long. So how do you complement that with building a culture? It's just like listening to your employees once every 5 years isn't going to cut it either, right? So it's a new workplace, it's a new employee, expectations are there, and feedback loops have to be really quick, just like we are as consumers, right? We expect speed and the ability to be able to have our voice heard to the brand as a customer, and that's no different in the workplace.
Well, Rob, let's zoom in on two specific use cases here. Let's do a use case where, you're a leader, maybe I'm your team member, and I did something partially right? It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Could you take, your framework and how might a leader structure that recognition? And then the second one is like, maybe I did something and it was partially wrong, right? And because that's the commonality, right? Rarely is it perfect, rarely is it all wrong, right? There's usually a blend. So let's take those two use cases in isolation and be like let's model it for our listeners. What might that look like so they can walk away and say, okay, I now have a skill that I could apply. So does that sound like a worthy challenge for us?
Yeah, I'm okay with that challenge.
All right. So what's something somebody in your team has done partially well in the recent past, and then how did you break it down in your mind to say whether it was SMT? You also talk about situation, approach, structure, and impact. So I think you mentioned that when we did the interview. So give us that template, and then would you deliver a conversation, assuming I was that guy?
Yeah, I think I always start with the specific and meaningful and timely, right? To my point, hey, thanks for going out of your way to get that report done faster and quicker than ever, high quality, all those items. But why was important and meaningful? This was something that our customers were looking at. It's critical to the success of our business and making sure they're happy. Our key metrics are or net promoter score and those customer sat. So you're complementing what we call at WorkTango, the North Star. Like that's our North Star goal this year is some of the major customer sat metrics. And then obviously from a timely level, it happened right away. But the reality is then understanding like, hey, like what was the motivation behind that? Like, what were any barriers there in terms of getting you there? And it's just trying to understand if I can kind of get in the head of the individual, then I could try to make that a replicable process for other people on the team. I can understand what like my goal as a leader is to remove barriers at the end of the day, right? So how do I remove barriers that might be there for the next time? So too often we spend on the outcome, like you hit your goal, you hit your sales number, you delivered the report, whatever it is. And we often forget to dive a little deeper because then you're getting in the head of the process and the approach. And then it's not too different on the, I'll call it the more constructive feedback. Like recognition is positive feedback. And, there's also the constructive side where it is a bit of that structure, as I mentioned earlier, like a retrospective saying, hey, what do you think went well, right? In this process or thing you delivered. Great. Let's lean on that and see how we replicate that in the future. What didn't go well, Lee? And you're going to share, this is what I think didn't go well. If it's what I think, great, we're on the same page. If I think there's a gap there, I'm happy to say from my perspective, this is what I think didn't go well. What do you think? And at least you're having just a constructive conversation. And then the last part is, again, what would we do differently next time? What would you do? What would I do? So again, that concept of a retrospective, I think is a really good way to structure it. But I think underlying all of it is what are the motivations of that person, right? If that person's motivation was to get promoted, hey, in this next role, these are the competencies you need to get there. If that person was maybe to move to another part of the business, and by the way, like that new part of the business, very metrics oriented, like you didn't build that into this process or structurally. Like let's think about how you might do that differently or next time to get you qualified again for that next job you're looking at. So you asked earlier about some of the structures at companies. It's not just recognition and feedback, like purpose and is important too. So understanding individual purpose kind of leads you. I think it adds another human layer to the conversation above and beyond work.
Yeah. Well, that we call those the six fundamental human needs, right? That was podcast episode 6 for those of you who are deeper into this, right? When he talks about what was the drivers, what was the things like that was kind of one of the models we use for helping you categorize those. So I want to take that and just kind of distill it a little bit because you had so many great nuggets that were embedded in that example. I heard you said kind of if you're giving constructive feedback, let's just zoom in on that use case, right? Where you're starting with like, okay, hey, what was the goal, right? What was the outcome that we're trying to do? And then how did you feel it went? I noticed that you started with you asking that question versus, well, Rob, tisk, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. Like, I think that's the temptation to give constructive feedback. And you know what? I'm going to say there's probably a time and a place for it just to be like, hey, Rob, okay, you missed A and B, get done. And like, that's fine. But that's in a case where Rob's already driving. He just needs to get some information that he missed and you're just being transactional. Fine. But I think the more challenging scenario is where, you know, if you can take a moment to ask the question, well, how did you feel that it went? And you're like, well, I think I got it done and I think I did okay. And I think I did this, right? You just pointing it out isn't going to help them. Like you got to help them be able to see it even when you're not around to point it out. And I think that was the power of your approach here was asking those questions to get in line with how they're seeing it. So you see what they're seeing and you also see what they're not seeing. Right. I think that was not an accident that you were asking that question for them first.
Yeah, I think it leads also on something I think is really helpful anytime I try to approach those conversations or, you know, if someone wants to try it on their own. First is when you're having those tough feedback discussions, replace blame with curiosity. Like the reality is that when you're curious about, hey, like I realized this was maybe not as done as high quality as in the past, like help me understand what happened versus you missed the boat on this. And now you start understanding, oh, you know what? They had multiple priorities that you didn't know about, or it was given to them last minute. But again, then it becomes this, I say, be a collaborator, not an adversary. Like, how do you collaborate towards an understanding of that person, how they're feeling? Like the whole spirit of psychological safe conversations, like that's really critical to build that, because what? The next feedback conversation will be easier. The next one will be easier when you build that safety. So sometimes replacing, you know, blame with curiosity really helps the tough feedback conversations get to a good outcome. And at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want a better outcome for the person, for the leader, for the company. And that's why I was mentioning there has to be this underlying motivation of what success looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then and you mentioned motivation again. So you get curious, you know, how did you see that? How did that work for you? And then you're thinking, what is motivating them? Right. And if their motivation is to get to a promotion, great. If their motivation is to be, you know, just to do a good job and make a difference, great. If their motivation is to feel more connection, great. Like, you know, I don't care what their motivation is, but I got to know what it is. So if I can then hear what they're doing and see what they were missing, and I know what's motivating them as a leader, it's easier for me then to close just that gap versus just kind of, you know, blanket carpet bombing them with 10 different things they did wrong and hoping they see it next time. It's like they won't, right? But if I can say, Rob, okay, I see what's going. You felt torn by competing priorities in that situation, and you really are trying to be seen as a team player. That's what's motivating you. That's what's driving you. And so in an effort to be a team player, you spread yourself too thin. And then what ended up happening with your reputation as a team player when all of those things were only partially done? Not so great. And it's like, okay, noble intention, good motivation, not the desired outcome. So in the future, right, you know, how might you prioritize it? How might you renegotiate those commitments? How might you do whatever so you're able to deliver, you know, hit the target with those folks? And that's the what can we do different part, right? So there's kind of like 3 phases. There's the what was the goal? What was your role? Then we had how did you do? What's the motivator? And then the close is, okay, now we can see exactly what to do differently next time. And to your point, they're more likely to actually do that next time versus just walk away jaded.
Yeah. And tying back to the other thing we were talking about earlier, making space for this is so important. Just like you can't recognize people once a year or listen to their sentiment once a year, you can't ask people what they want to accomplish and then check in a year later and say, hey, yeah, you got there or you didn't. And if you didn't have the feedback conversations beforehand, they might be thinking they're killing it. Yeah. Oh, we're just nailing it. Like I've been working hard for 12 months and apparently the wrong direction. That's demotivating. So making space for those feedback discussions is important, because if you know, and I always like ask people what's their, not only their company goal, but what's their personal goal, because then you can start tying to those motivations as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Rob, I want to ask you a question here, and let's explore this. And if you decide you don't want this to be on the episode, we'll cut it. Okay. So I want to be vulnerable with you here too. So I might want to cut it because I'm like, I don't want to get up here. Now you say, yeah. So editors like take that part out, right? So I'm gonna ask the question, but we'll decide if we want to keep this or not. Rob, I don't know about you, but I've begun to notice a shift because I think what we've described here is a really good architecture for strong recognition and feedback conversations. And I've seen it work really well with boomers, with Xers, and even with Yers, Gen Yers. I'm talking generationally now. And yet I'm encountering scenarios with the Gen Zs, so the ones that are just entering the workforce right now. And they're a year or two out of college. And I myself and other leaders who value these principles, who've done this kind of work, are trying to have these conversations using this, and we're finding it's not working as well. And so there's something a little bit different. And I mean, every generation's a little bit different, but there is something about the Gen Zers where, and I have my opinions on what might have contributed to it in terms of our educational system and screen time and all those other factors. But whatever it is, it's there. Are you seeing a difference in how they're receiving and showing up for feedback and recognition than any of the other prior 3 generations? Or is that just me?
I think there's definitely a change. Like, think about how these folks grew up. Like, they grew up with, you take an Uber ride and you get 5 stars, you order something online. Like, the level of feedback is immediate, it's constant. And whether it's them giving it to them, them giving it out, typically it's them expecting that in the workplace. So I don't think that's very different than, maybe a generation before them, but I think it's definitely it's definitely more evident, but it's also a bigger reason why companies need to be thinking about these real-time discussions or conversations or making space for it, because again, once a year, not even once a quarter, is going to be enough. I think the only other difference I've been seeing, I think it's back to the original question around like, what are some of the, the pillars of building a great experience? It's not just listening to people and, the feedback world, positive, negative. These people come to your organization with passion and purpose. And that might be aligned to something that they, grew up with. It might be aligned to something that's recently found. But if your organization or your team or your role in many cases aren't aligned to something that they're passionate about, again, it could be a cause, it could be something that they care about personally. I think that's when it comes up. And that's why I think having the discussions around seeing what their motivations are, or building ways that you can build ways in your organization or space so that they can kind of live that part of their brain and have impact on that passion or purpose. That's probably where I'm seeing more today than I've had in the past. I think employees have always had their own personal passions and purposes, but they just move at a different speed, and they don't care if you're not aligned to their passion. They're pretty specific about what they love.
Yeah, that I definitely have seen. It's much more front and center. Whereas other folks were like, okay, I have my passion, but that only needs to partially overlap with work. Nowadays, it's like I am expecting it to fully overlap with my work, and if I'm not seeing it or I'm not feeling it, then there's definitely a degradation there. So that is a pattern I'm seeing for certain. And I think for certain organization like yours, like mine, the purpose and impact is so tangible. It's a competitive advantage for us when we're recruiting for folks. I think other organizations, it's like they have to work harder to say, like, here's why our product makes a difference in the community or in the world, or, for these various causes. So I think in the past, we just took it for granted. It's like, well, because you have a job, right? And why am I doing this? Because it's your job, versus like, why are we doing this? Because it makes a difference for somebody out there, a child, a mom, a bus driver, somebody. Like, you've got to articulate that purpose and impact as a leader. And it can't just be the CEO saying it. It's got to be that frontline supervisor that says, when you answer this call for this person on your HVAC repair, what you are doing is, making a difference for that person. So I think that has definitely shown up louder. I think it always helps, but now it's a necessity.
And often, like, I talk to leaders and they scoff at their approach or what they care about, or it's like that's their agenda, not ours. But at the end of the day, like thinking of it from another lens, so the way I approach it is, can this complement or improve my culture in some way? Like, if they're passionate about, a certain cause or something that's important for personal growth, hey, build a committee in the organization of people that care about that. Build an ERP out if that's really important to you. Like, how do you turn people into a leadership world where they get that part of their brain and heart work day in and day out? And when they're engaged in that, they're going to be engaged at what their day-to-day, job on their resume, or what their resume is or their job description states. So instead of just scoffing at it, I find embracing in a way to bring that and add value to your organization. I think that can work, and I've seen different scenarios in which it has.
Yeah, why not invite it? But again, I think the key there is it complementary, right? And I think that's the dynamic we're seeing with, this drive for, well, everybody needs to bring their authentic selves and they just need to express themselves. And then, no, we all need to, be marching to the same drum and we're all consistent and we're all in alignment. And you're like, those sound like different things. But I believe if we raise it at one level, it's really, how do you bring the authentic parts of yourself that are complementary to the common vision, that are complementary to the core values and the core competencies, right? Well, then we've made a good hire, we've got good alignment, and then you're not a cultural fit, you're a cultural add, right? And then I think those can be empatico versus like, well, it's my authentic self to be a bully and a jerk, so that's just who I am, and you need to accept it. And you're like, yeah, no, right? Like, bye-bye, see you later. So I think that can join those two forces. And then, like you said, that amplifies then our impact versus it being antagonistic.
Yeah, I love you said additive. It reminds me of a story. When we first started WorkTango, we said we don't want values because they're just simply what you believe. We want what we call virtues. They're old Bushido principles of samurais on what virtues are what you do. And the idea was, if we can really lean into what people do every day, recognize for those, tell those stories, reinforce those, then that sets this foundation and precedent for how we operate in our organization. So if you're going to do something contrary to that, like you said, be a bully, then immediately it's a no. But if it's something that's complementary or additive, then yeah, let's hear you out and see how you provide value. But that's just the foundation of that. Is so critical. And then I always leverage values in your recognition to reinforce, or in your feedback to reinforce. It's just too many companies write it on a website and they don't live it every day.
Yeah. No, and there are opportunities every day for you to be able to micro acknowledge, oh, that was a demonstration of that virtue or principle or value, right? To your point, or that was a demonstration of that core competency. And it's like, you keep anchoring it back, and all of a sudden then it's like, okay, they can't see the world any other way than that. Well, Rob, what's some advice if we can close out? Okay, let's say we're a leader and you're like, I'm hearing all of this. I haven't done a good job of it, right? I've been busy. I've been frustrated. I've been grumpy, whatever. Like they've not created this environment that you're describing. And they're like, I want another chance. Like how might they start to repair or rebuild a situation where maybe they haven't been doing the recognition, maybe they haven't been, making the space. And when you say make space, I want to be clear, we're not talking about 3-hour counseling sessions on a couch. I mean, we're talking about like a couple of minutes here and there. Let's be really honest about quantifying that. But if a leader's been struggling or hasn't been doing this, what's the first step? There's probably 10, but what's the first step to really turning things around so your relationship with those employees is different?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't define what success looks like, whether that put on your top list of your accomplishments this month or your goals, or I read a top 5 every day, like the 5th one is acknowledge, recognize, take feedback. Like, it has to be something you put out there. There's so much data out there. When you put your goal out there into the world, that's where you'll see success. But maybe a 1B to that is find a partner that can keep you accountable. Maybe it's another leader in your organization who you can collectively do this and build accountability on. I've done it with my own team that's reported to me. You say, listen, I'm really trying to get better at X, Y, and Z. Call me out when I don't, or when you feel that it's not there. Because that vulnerability, people want to help. They want to support. So that would be the 1A and 1B. And the second is just in the spirit of making space. Like, I have a 15-minute in my calendar every single day, just one to remind me we're busy. Stuff happens, right? We forget. just to remind me. And sometimes 80% of the time I'll do it. Sometimes I'll be distracted, but you need a trigger. And until it becomes habit, that trigger needs to hit you all the time.
That is some great advice, really, for any behavioral change, but specifically a behavioral change around recognizing behavioral change. So I heard you say, make it a public goal. Hey, team, I haven't been doing as well with recognition. That is an intention I have to be better at that, more frequent at that. Have an accountability partner, like, hey, somebody watch my wing and be like, there was an opportunity there, you missed it. And to have triggers that are external and until they become internal, was what I kind of heard there. So that is some great practical advice from Dr. Catalano on this therapy couch today. Well, Rob, where can people find out more from you, see what they can do? Because I think on the other side, you have some leaders like, I'm doing it manually and verbally and all this stuff. I would love to have a more robust system where this was leveraging data. I had some technology that amplified this further. Where can folks find out more about taking this skill to the next level of maturity with an organization like WorkTango?
Yeah. So, before WorkTango, like personally, I love chatting to people about this and the challenges and the war stories. So I'm littering LinkedIn feeds everywhere. So definitely finding it on LinkedIn. And then WorkTango, again, whether it's me or WorkTango.com, some good indications through case studies and stories of what's possible out there. And a lot of priorities for business leaders and HR leaders these days. But it's, I think, hey, we're getting into planning season for 2025, right? Let's, what do you want success to look like at the end of it? Focus on one or two things. And definitely the building a better experience should be one of them, in my opinion, but I'm happy to help in any way companies need it.
That's fantastic. Really appreciate that. Yeah, definitely check them out. WorkTango.com, you guys. They're doing some pretty awesome things that can help cultures that are already pretty good really take it to the next level, and maybe help cultures that have been struggling for a while and haven't been able to put their finger on it, be able to get a better beat on where to focus, because you can't do everything at once, right? Like you said, pick one or two things and prioritize. Love that. So, all righty. Well, listen, dude, man, thank you so much. I mean, I know, like, I am literally envisioning leaders that I'm working with right now. I want to record this. And as soon as it's published, I'm going to be like, listen to this. That's what you needed to hear. Right. So I know they're going to be very relevant to some specific friends and clients of mine. So thank you for helping to make that happen.
Oh man, thanks for having me. Let me know when not only this, but other ones come out. I'll try and share it to networks and stuff. Yeah, happy to help.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.